The sharpest weapon I carried into the examination hall was not hidden in my sleeve, sewn into my skirt, or smuggled beneath the label of my water bottle. It was a blank sheet of paper, bright white beneath the fluorescent lights, clean enough to look innocent and dangerous enough to ruin the girl who had once smiled while trading my future for hers. When I opened my eyes that morning, I was not in a grave, not in a hospital bed, not even in the rain where my first life had ended. I was sitting at my old vanity, with one half of my hair curled and the other half pinned in crooked clips, listening to my best friend hum on the other side of my bedroom door. The sound was so ordinary it made my stomach turn. Mira Sloan always hummed before she stole something. In our first life, she hummed before borrowing my pearl earrings for the scholarship dinner and never returning them. She hummed before slipping my internship acceptance letter into her own folder and telling everyone in the office must have made a clerical error. And on the day of the National Laureate examination, she had hummed outside my bedroom while waiting to walk with me to the hall where my score would be stolen, my name would be dragged through a disciplinary hearing, and her future would bloom on top of my ashes. This time, I turned from the mirror, looked at the sealed exam admission card on my desk, and smiled at the untouched stack of practice papers beside it. I had come back 5 hours before the exam. Not enough time to save the world, maybe, but more than enough time to leave one page empty. Mira knocked twice, then pushed the door open before I answered, exactly as she had done in my first life. She wore a cream cardigan that made her look soft, a navy ribbon tied neatly around her ponytail, and the sweet, careful expression of a girl who had spent years convincing adults that kindness looked like her face. "Nora, you're not ready?" she asked, glancing at my half-curled hair, my bare feet, and the admission card lying beside the silver hairbrush. "We have to leave early. Seat verification starts at 8. In the old life, I had jumped up, apologized, rushed, let her choose my earrings, let her straighten my collar, let her carry my spare pen pouch because she said my hands were shaking too much. I had mistaken all of it for affection. This time, I noticed the tiny bulge in the inner pocket of her cardigan, the square outline of folded paper too stiff to be tissues and too small to be notes. A candidate correction form, I thought, and my pulse slowed instead of racing. She had already collected the tools she needed. The system used a 2-stage score confirmation process. Handwritten answer sheets were matched to candidate numbers, then final scores were entered into the laureate board database after grading. If a candidate identity discrepancy was filed before scanning, a registrar could manually correct the candidate number attached to a paper. In my first life, Mira and her cousin in records used that process to make my high-scoring paper become hers and her weak paper become mine. By the time I protested, the original envelopes had been destroyed under routine handling rules, the digital audit had been adjusted, and Mira had cried so beautifully that even my own aunt whispered that envy had turned me cruel. But I remembered what no one else did. I remembered the timestamp. I remembered the red folder. I remembered the registrar's left hand covered in ink because the machine had jammed at 11:47. I remembered everything except how to forgive her. "Give me 10 minutes, I said, turning back to the mirror. My voice sounded calm, which surprised me. Dying once must have burned the tremor out of it. Mira stepped in and touched the corner of my admission card with 2 fingers, not lifting it, just testing whether I would stop her. "You should let me keep this in my folder," she said lightly. "You always lose things when you're nervous." In my first life, I had laughed and handed it over. That one small surrender had allowed her to compare my barcode with hers before the exam, photograph my candidate number, and prepare the discrepancy form she later used. This time, I placed my palm over the card until her fingers had no choice but to withdraw. "I'm not nervous," I said. "And I'm not losing anything today." Something crossed her face then, not anger exactly, but calculation. It vanished so quickly that if I had not already seen her lie to a hearing panel with tears shining on command, I might have missed it. She tilted her head. "Did you sleep badly?"
No, irregular.
I slept enough. That was not true. I had not slept at all. I had spent the first 10 minutes after waking in this life vomiting into my bathroom sink, the next 10 writing down every detail I remembered, and the next 30 executing the simplest trap I could build with no allies, no time, and no proof anyone would believe unless I placed it directly in their hands. I had emailed the examination integrity office from my own account with a subject line candidate paper tampering risk. I had attached a signed statement saying I suspected my candidate identity might be manipulated after collection. I had not accused Mira by name. That would have sounded jealous. Instead, I described a vulnerability in the correction form process and stated one testable fact. I intended to submit my written answer sheet blank, with the proctor's initials on the top margin, while requesting that the untouched state of the paper be photographed before envelope sealing. If any score later appeared under my candidate number, or if my blank sheet appeared in another candidate file, tampering would be undeniable. It was a ridiculous plan. It was also the first plan in my life that belonged entirely to me. The National Laureate examination was supposed to be the cleanest door into power. Every year, the top 50 candidates won direct entry into the Solène Civil Academy, a stipend large enough to free poor families from debt, and interviews with ministries, courts, hospitals, laboratories, and embassies. The exam was not only academic, it was social. It decided who would be introduced as promising and who would spend adulthood explaining why promise had curdled into failure. I had studied for it like a starving person studies a locked pantry. My father had died before I turned 12, leaving my mother and me with debts hidden inside polite envelopes. My aunt took us in, and every favor she offered came wrapped around a hook. I earned my place at Ashford Preparatory on partial scholarship, worked in the library after class to cover fees, tutored younger students until my throat ached, and learned to answer questions faster than hunger could distract me. Mira arrived at Ashford in 7th year with soft sweaters, expensive pens, and a family that treated ambition as a decorative accessory. She sat beside me on the first day, shared her imported strawberry candies, and said, "You look like someone who knows where the good seats are." I had been lonely enough to mistake curiosity for warmth. By the time I realized Mira did not befriend people, she collected them. My notes were her notes, my strategies were her strategies, and every teacher who praised my discipline also praised her for bringing me out of my shell. In the old life, she did not beat me because she was smarter. She beat me because she understood earlier than I did that institutions are less interested in truth than in paperwork that looks orderly. That first life ended slowly after the score swap. The results list posted my name beside a score so low it looked like a clerical joke. Myra's name appeared at the top, wrapped in gold digital confetti, followed by reporters, flowers, and a scholarship committee chair who called her a once-in-a-generation mind. I demanded a review. Mira cried. Her mother said stress had unbalanced me. My aunt said she had always worried I was too intense. The board agreed to a private hearing, then produced records showing that the paper attached to my candidate number contained rambling, incomplete answers in handwriting close enough to mine to make denial seem hysterical. Myra's paper, they said, was brilliant. I asked to see the original packets. Destroyed after scanning, they told me. I asked for the correction log.
Routine adjustment, no irregularity.
I asked why Myra's weak handwriting had suddenly gained my margin structure, my citation shorthand, my exact method of underlining statutes twice and cases once. The chair folded his hands and said exceptional students often shared study techniques. Afterward, Mira followed me into the corridor, eyes still wet from the performance, and whispered, "You should have been grateful just being near me." That was the first time she let me see the real person behind the cream cardigan. Months later, when no school would recommend me, when my mother's health failed under the shame, when I worked nights copying legal documents for men who called me the girl who lied about Mira Sloan, I understood that she had not only stolen my score. She had stolen the version of me people were willing to believe. So when Mira asked, "Did you review the constitutional essay frameworks last night?" I almost laughed. We were in the car by then, her family's black sedan sliding through the wet morning streets while her driver pretended not to listen. In the old life, I had recited frameworks to her all the way to the center because she claimed hearing my voice calmed her down. Later, sections of those same frameworks appeared in her brilliant paper, copied through the swap and praised by examiners as elegant. This time, I leaned my head against the window and watched rain scatter the reflection of traffic lights into red veins. "No," I said. I stopped reviewing. Myra's hands tightened around her folder. "You stopped." I decided cramming would make me careless. "That doesn't sound like you. Maybe I got tired of sounding like me." She laughed, but it arrived half a beat late. Her phone buzzed. She angled it away, though the screen reflected faintly in the window. 11:45 after collection. Red folder. Same plan. My stomach clenched, not with fear, but with recognition.
Her cousin was still involved.
The red folder existed. The trap had not vanished, because I had changed one morning. Good. A trap only worked if the animal believed the path was familiar. Mira tucked the phone away and leaned closer. "Nora, promise me something. No matter what happens today, we stay together, right?" I turned from the window and studied the girl who had once stepped over my future without wrinkling her shoes.
"Of course," I said.
All the way to the end. The examination center was built like a courthouse and run like a theater. Marble steps, flags in the atrium, metal detectors, volunteers in gray blazers, a camera crew filming anxious candidates for the evening news. Parents clustered behind rope barriers with thermoses and prayers. Students stood in nervous groups, whispering formulas and legal principles and historical dates as if knowledge might evaporate if not spoken aloud. Mira moved through them like light through glass. People turned toward her automatically. Teachers greeted her, classmates smiled. One boy from West Hall offered to carry her folder, and she refused with a modest little wave. "I'm fine, really." Then she looked back to make sure I had seen. In the old life, that look would have hurt. Myra's gift was making every room feel like a stage where I had been cast as her shadow.
Today, it helped me.
Shadows are ignored. I slipped out of the group near the registration tables and approached the oldest proctor on duty, a narrow woman with silver hair twisted into a knot and a badge-reading chief invigilator, Dr. Elaine Voss. I remembered her from the hearing. She had not defended me, but she had frowned when the board dismissed my request for original packets. Not an ally, not then, but possibly a person who disliked sloppy procedure more than she liked comfortable lies. I placed my admission card on her table and said, quietly, "Dr. Voss, I submitted an integrity concern to the board this morning. I need to confirm whether your office received the instruction to witness the condition of my answer sheet at submission." Her eyes lifted slowly. "Your name?"
Lenora Valle.
Candidate 31874. She looked at her tablet, frowned, scrolled, and for one sickening second I thought my message had vanished into bureaucracy. Then her expression changed. Not warmth. Interest. "Step aside with me, Miss Vale." Mira saw us leave the line. I felt her stare land between my shoulder blades like a hook, but I did not turn. Dr. Voss led me behind a temporary partition where two assistant invigilators were unpacking sealed exam packets.
"Explain," she said.
People always say that as if the truth can be made small enough to fit comfortably in a minute. I did not tell her I had been reborn. I did not tell her that in another life I had watched her sit at a disciplinary table while men with polished shoes erased me. I said, "There is a weakness in the candidate discrepancy process. I believe someone may attempt to reassign answer sheets after collection by filing a correction form. I cannot prove intent before it happens. So I am creating a paper condition that cannot be confused with normal performance. I intend to hand in a blank answer sheet. I request that you initial the top and bottom margins at collection, photograph the sheet, seal it separately, and record that I submitted it intentionally blank under observation. I understand the academic consequence." One assistant invigilator looked at me as if I had confessed to madness. Dr. Voss did not. She examined me over the rim of her glasses. "You are asking to sacrifice your exam score to test a security concern." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I had already watched the system protect a thief once. Because a score could be retaken, but a stolen identity hardened into history. Because if I wrote a brilliant paper again, Mira would steal it again, and no one would believe me again, and I refused to offer my own work as the rope used to hang me." I said, Because a clean 0 is safer than a stolen 100. Dr. Voss held my gaze for a long moment, then turned to the assistant. Prepare an incident observation form. Candidate Vale will remain under standard examination conditions. No special access. At submission, I will witness the packet myself. By the time I returned to the candidate line, Myra's smile had sharpened. Everything okay? She asked. Just a form issue. What kind of form issue? The kind forms are made for. Her eyes flickered. The students around us were too busy panicking to notice the thin ice forming under her voice. She touched my sleeve. Nora, you're scaring me. There it was, the old leash. Make me responsible for her comfort, and I would hand her anything to prove I was not cruel. In another life, that sentence would have unlocked me. Today, I gently removed her hand. You should focus on your own paper. I always do, she said. The lie was so smooth it deserved applause. We passed through metal detectors, surrendered our phones, checked our pockets, and entered Hall A, where 400 desks waited in perfect rows beneath a ceiling high enough to make every cough echo like a confession. My seat was A37. Myra's was B12, diagonal and close enough that in the old life I could see her shoulders relax whenever I bent over my paper and began writing. This time, I sat, placed my pens in a straight line, and stared at the sealed booklet until the room blurred. A blank sheet sounds simple until your future has been trained to fear emptiness. My hands wanted to write. Every habit in me rose up screaming. I knew the likely questions. I knew the essay structures. I knew the case comparisons, the economic models, the public ethics examples, the literary references examiners loved. Knowledge crowded behind my teeth like birds beating against glass. To sit still, while prepared, felt like drowning in air. The first page of the exam booklet asked us to analyze a constitutional crisis involving emergency powers and judicial review. In the old life, I had written an opening that my examiner later called controlled, precise, and unusually mature when praising Mira on a televised panel. I remembered it word for word. A government that fears scrutiny often mistakes speed for legitimacy. My fingers twitched toward the pen. Across the aisle, Mira glanced back, quick as a knife. She expected to see me begin. I uncapped my pen, lowered the tip, and wrote nothing. Not a mark. I let the nib hover until the ink threatened to bead, then recapped it. Mira blinked. I turned the page. Question 2. Data interpretation. Question 3. Ethical scenario. Question 4. Comparative policy. Each one opened inside my mind like a door I knew how to pass through. Each one remained unanswered. At first, the silence felt impossible. Then it became clean. Around me, pens scratched like insects. Pages turned. Someone sniffled. A proctor's shoes whispered along the aisle. I sat with my blank paper and listened to the machinery of ambition grind on without me. It was almost peaceful until the first memory broke through. My mother sitting at our kitchen table in the old life, holding the rejection letter from the appeal board, saying, "Tell me you didn't do it, Nora," in a voice that meant she wanted to believe me, but the world had made belief expensive. I had said I did not. She had cried anyway. I looked down at the blank sheet and thought, this is for the version of me who kept explaining after everyone stopped listening. 2 hours into the exam, Mira requested extra paper. That was not in the old life. A proctor delivered it, and she accepted with a grateful smile. I watched from the corner of my eye as she filled page after page with frantic motion, not elegant answers but volume, a strategy she used when she wanted effort to disguise confusion. If she knew I was blank, why keep writing? Then I understood. The swap plan had layers. If my paper was unusable, she still needed a paper of her own that could survive first glance. She thought perhaps I had hidden my answers in the multiple-choice sheet or planned an appeal. She thought perhaps I was panicking and would start later. She thought perhaps she could adapt faster than me because she had spent years adapting to theft. I almost admired the survival instinct. Almost. At the halfway mark, Dr. Voss paused beside my desk. She did not speak, because proctors never discuss content during the exam, but her eyes fell on the untouched answer sheet, then on my face. I gave the smallest nod. She moved on. The observation was now real. A candidate sitting blank can be dismissed as distress. A chief invigilator noting it under an integrity file becomes evidence. Near the end, Mira dropped her pen. It rolled under my desk. In the old life, I had picked it up and whispered, "Here," earning a warning from a proctor and giving Mira an excuse to claim later that I had tried to communicate with her. This time, I kept both hands on my table. The pen lay between my shoes like a tiny black bone. Mira whispered, "Nora." I stared forward. The proctor retrieved it. "No communication," he said. Mira flushed. For once, the warning belonged to her. When time was called, the hall inhaled as one body. Pens went down. Chairs creaked. Several candidates looked close to tears. I sat very still while Dr. Voss approached with 2 assistant invigilators and a sealed, transparent sleeve. "Candidate A37, she said in the official tone that made students sit straighter. "Please confirm your answer sheet submission." Every nearby head turned. Mira turned too, her face arranged into concern. I lifted my answer sheet with both hands. It was blank except for the printed candidate barcode and the identity fields we were required to fill before starting.
No answers. No corrections. No strainek.
Dr. Voss examined it. "You are submitting this paper intentionally blank?" "Yes." A murmur spread. Myra's eyes widened beautifully, but not from surprise. From fear calculating how loudly to perform surprise. "Nora," she whispered. "What are you doing?" Dr. Voss looked toward her. Silence. Then she initialed the top margin, the bottom margin, and the reverse side. The assistant photographed the sheet beside my admission card and a timestamp card reading 11:03. Dr. Voss placed it in the transparent sleeve, sealed the sleeve with red evidence tape, and wrote the seal number on the incident observation form. "Candidate acknowledges academic consequence of blank submission," she said. "Candidate also has active integrity concern on file." The words active integrity concern traveled farther than any shout could have. Myra's face went pale beneath her careful makeup. That was the first reward of my second life. Not revenge completed, not justice won, but the first crack in her certainty. The old plan should have collapsed there. A reasonable thief would have abandoned the swap, taken whatever score her own paper earned, and lived to steal another day. Mira was not reasonable. Greed rarely is when dressed as destiny. Outside the hall, after candidates were released into the courtyard for lunch, she caught my arm near a statue of the Academy founder and squeezed hard enough to hurt.
"What was that?" she hissed.
Students streamed around us, too full of exam adrenaline to notice. "A blank sheet," I said. "People hand those in when they have nothing to write. Don't play stupid." Her voice had lost its sugar. "Good. I wanted to see the machinery without the velvet cover. You just destroyed your score." "Maybe." "Why?" I looked at her hand on my arm until she released me. "Why does my score matter so much to you?" Her lips parted, then closed. For 1 second, hatred showed in her eyes with such nakedness that the rebirth felt worth it. Then she laughed, too loudly. "Because I care about you, idiot. Because if you fail, your aunt will blame me for not calming you down. Then stop worrying. Nora, if this is some breakdown, tell me now. We can say you were sick. We can get you withdrawn." Withdrawn. Another mechanism. If I withdrew, my blank paper might be excluded from normal processing, and Myra's swap could still attach her paper to my absence or avoid triggering the discrepancy. I smiled.
"No.
I want it processed." She stared as if I had slapped her. Behind her, a volunteer carried a stack of red folders toward the records annex. The color struck through the courtyard like blood. Mira saw me notice and stepped into my line of sight. "Let's go eat," she said. "You look faint." "I'm not hungry." "You never eat when you're scared." "I'm not scared." "You should be." She caught herself too late. I tilted my head. "Should I?" The bell rang for the afternoon session before she could answer. The afternoon session did not matter for the trap, but I sat it anyway. It involved an oral reasoning interview, administered in small rooms, recorded for moderation. In my first life, I had done well enough to support my written score, though the written paper carried the most weight. This time, I answered cleanly, calmly, and without giving Mira anything to use. She could steal a sheet. She could bribe a registrar. She could not climb into a recorded interview room and wear my voice. When the panel asked why public institutions fail under pressure, I almost smiled. Because procedure without courage becomes decoration, I said. And because people who benefit from confusion often call clarity disruptive. One examiner lifted his eyebrows and wrote something down. Afterward, I returned to the holding area, where Mira sat surrounded by classmates, retelling my blank submission in a trembling voice that made it sound like a tragedy she had barely survived. She just froze, Mira whispered, loud enough for me to hear. I tried to help, but Dr. Voss was so strict. I'm worried she's having some kind of episode. A few students looked at me with pity. In the old life, pity had been the first step toward disbelief. This time, I let it gather. Let Mira commit to the story that I had broken. Let her tell witnesses she expected my score to be low. Let her later explain why she somehow ended up with the blank paper of a girl she had publicly described as collapsed. I walked past without defending myself. Silence is dangerous when people expect begging. It forces them to fill the space with assumptions, and assumptions, if documented, become traps with their own handwriting. At 4:20 p.m., after the final identity check, the candidates were dismissed. Most went home to sleep or cry. Mira insisted on waiting with me in the atrium until her driver arrived, though her car was already visible through the glass doors. She wanted to know whether I had told anyone else. She wanted to know whether the integrity concern had named her. She wanted to know whether I was reckless or strategic. I gave her nothing. My head hurts, I said. I'm going home. Come to my house first, she said quickly. Mother ordered dinner. We can talk. You shouldn't be alone. In the old life I had gone. I remembered sitting in her kitchen while her mother, Celeste Sloan, stroked my hair and said gifted girls sometimes sabotage themselves because they fear success. I remember drinking tea that made me sleep for 14 hours, waking too late to file a same-day irregularity report when preliminary results appeared. I remembered Mira standing in the doorway, already dressed for the press interview, saying, "Rest, Nora. You need it." This time I said, "No." Myra's eyes hardened. "You're making this difficult." "Making what difficult?" "Helping you." "Then don't." Her driver opened the car door outside. She did not move. "Nora," she said softly, the sweetness returning because two teachers had walked within earshot. "Whatever happens, I hope you remember I tried." "I'll remember everything," I said. That answer satisfied me so much I nearly laughed. She stepped into the car, and as it pulled away, I watched her lift her phone. The first call began before she cleared the gate. I did not go home either. I crossed the street to the public library, sat in a corner where the security camera watched the reading tables, and opened a notebook I had bought that morning with cash. Then I wrote down every interaction from the day in exact order. The bedroom, the car message, Dr. Voss, the pen drop, the blank sheet witnessing, Myra's courtyard threat, her withdrawal suggestion, her holding area performance, her invitation to dinner. Not because memory needed help. Mine was carved open. But institutions love documents more than wounds. I signed each page, photographed it, emailed the images to myself and to the anonymous integrity address I had used earlier, then placed the notebook in a rented locker beside the library desk. At 6:03 p.m., my mother called. For a moment I could not answer. In the old life, this was the call where I lied and said the exam went fine because I wanted her to have one peaceful evening before the results destroyed us. Her voice now came through thin and tired. "Nora, how did it go?" I closed my eyes. My mother in this life had not yet looked at me with doubt. She had not yet learned to flinch when neighbors mentioned my name. "Strangely," I said, "but I need you to trust me for a few days." Silence. Then, carefully, "Are you hurt?" "No." "Did someone hurt you?" My throat tightened. In the old life, I had spent years wishing she had asked that sooner. "Someone tried," I said. "I'm stopping it." She did not understand, but she believed the part that mattered.
Come home, she said.
We'll eat first. Then you can tell me what you can. That was the second reward of my second life, going home before shame arrived. The preliminary score list was scheduled for release at noon the next day. In the old life, I had refreshed the portal from 11:58 with Mira beside me, our shoulders touching, her perfume sharp with citrus and vanilla. When the list loaded, she screamed first, then covered her mouth, then cried into my neck as if she had not known. I remembered my own score appearing so low, I felt the room tilt. This time, I did not refresh anything. I slept for 3 hours, woke before dawn, and made pancakes with my mother while my aunt paced behind us complaining that I was too calm. My aunt, Patricia Vale, had always admired winners the way some people admire weather, as if being struck by lightning proves the sky loves you. She had invested socially in my potential because it gave her something to mention at charity lunches. In the old life, the moment my score fell, she treated me like a bad stock. Myra's mother called, she said now, pretending to check messages. Apparently Mira did wonderfully in the afternoon interviews. Such resilience after being distracted by your little incident. My mother set down the spatula. Patricia.
What?
I'm only saying the exam waits for no one's emotions. I poured batter into the pan and watched it spread. Then Mira should be fine. My aunt narrowed her eyes. She did not like answers that gave her nowhere to push. At noon, the portal crashed. That had not happened in the old life. 10 minutes later, the board posted a notice. Preliminary results delayed due to technical audit. Candidates were instructed not to contact examination staff. I stared at the words until my chest loosened. The blank sheet had entered the machine. Somewhere inside records, the gears had jammed. At 12:27, Mira called me 14 times. I let each call ring out. Then came messages, first concerned, then irritated, then frightened enough to forget punctuation. Nora, answer me. Did you talk to anyone? Why is there an audit? You better not be doing something stupid. Mother says we need to align our accounts. Align our accounts. Even reborn, even trapped, she still thought truth was a negotiation between people with enough confidence. I took screenshots and sent them to the integrity thread. At 1:10, Dr. Voss replied with one line, "Please preserve all communications." It was the most beautiful sentence I had ever read. By evening, rumors had infected the academy group chats. Someone said a candidate had submitted a blank paper and triggered a mental health review. Someone said scores had been hacked. Someone said the top candidate's paper had vanished. Someone said the board had locked the records annex and was interviewing staff. Mira posted nothing. That was how I knew she was not in control. Mira loved public emotion when she had already arranged the ending. Silence meant she was still searching for the script. At 8:45, a black car stopped outside our apartment building. My aunt rushed to the window and hissed, "The Sloanes are here." My mother looked at me. "Do you want to see them?" In the old life, adults entered rooms around me without asking whether I wanted anything. This time, my mother asked. I said, "Yes, let them come up." When Mira and her mother stepped into our small living room, they carried expensive flowers and the atmosphere of people who had mistaken intimidation for diplomacy. Celeste Sloane spoke first. She was elegant in a pearl gray suit, with hair so smooth it looked lacquered. In my first life, she had embraced me after the hearing and whispered, "You poor thing," while the board chair watched approvingly. She believed cruelty done softly became manners. "Lenora," she said now, placing the flowers on our coffee table without asking, "we are all very worried." "About me?" I asked. "About the situation." My aunt hovered near the doorway, hungry for importance. Mira stood behind her mother with red-rimmed eyes that might have been real this time. Celeste folded her hands. "Young people under pressure sometimes make impulsive statements. The board may misunderstand your blank submission as an accusation. That could damage many innocent candidates." "Which innocent candidates?" I asked. "All of them," she said smoothly. "An audit delays everyone. Scholarships, interviews, travel arrangements. You would not want your personal distress to harm your classmates. There it was, the burden transferred back to me. In the old life, my demand for review had been selfish because it threatened Myra's celebration. Now, my precaution was selfish because it threatened everyone's schedule. Different wrapping, same knife. My mother sat beside me, silent but present. That helped more than any speech. I said, if everyone's records are clean, the audit will confirm that. Mira burst out, why did you hand in blank, Nora? Celeste's eyes flashed at her daughter, but too late. I looked at Mira. Why did it matter? Because people are saying insane things. People say insane things when facts are missing. Then give them facts. I gave the board a blank sheet. Mira stared at me with such hatred that my aunt finally noticed something wrong. Celeste stood. This conversation is unproductive. I smiled. I agree. She left the flowers behind. I threw them away before the elevator reached the ground floor. The next morning, the board summoned 10 candidates for procedural clarification. My name was first. Myra's was second. The message instructed us to arrive at the examination integrity office by 9 a.m., bring identification, and avoid discussing the matter with other candidates. My aunt nearly fainted from excitement and terror. Clarification? What does that mean? Did you cheat? Did Mira cheat? Are we being sued? My mother told her to sit down or leave. I wore a dark blue dress, the same one I had worn to my failed appeal in the old life. Back then, I had chosen it because it looked serious and innocent. Today, I chose it because I wanted to overwrite the memory. The integrity office occupied the third floor of an administrative building behind the examination center.
No joyride, no câmeras, no flags.
Just gray carpet, frosted glass, and the smell of burnt coffee. Dr. Voss sat at the conference table with 2 board investigators, a legal observer, and a man from the digital audit unit. In front of them were sealed sleeves, printed logs, and a red folder. Mira arrived 3 minutes after me, wearing white, her mother beside her as representative. When she saw the folder, she stopped so abruptly Celeste almost bumped into her. The digital auditor noticed. People who work with evidence notice small failures of choreography. We were seated separately. The lead investigator, Ms. Harrow, began without warmth. This is a procedural inquiry, not a disciplinary hearing. However, statements made today may be used if the matter escalates. Candidate Vale, confirm whether you submitted your written answer sheet intentionally blank. I did. Confirm whether you communicated that intention before the examination.
Yes.
To the integrity office, and then to Dr. Voss. Confirm whether anyone instructed you to do so. No. Why did you take that action? I looked at Mira, then back at Ms. Harrow. Because in a system where scores can be reassigned through discrepancy forms, a blank witness sheet is the only paper that cannot be stolen without exposing the hand that moved it. Mira laughed. It was a terrible choice. Too sharp, too early. That's paranoid, she said. Celeste touched her wrist under the table, but Ms. Harrow had already turned. Candidate Sloan, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Mira pressed her lips together. The investigator slid a document toward me. Is this your handwriting? It was my incident statement from the library. Yes. Is this your screenshot? Myra's message. Mother says we need to align our accounts. Yes. Mira whispered. That's private. Ms. Harrow did not look at her. Private communications may be relevant when they concern an active audit. Then came the red folder. The legal observer opened it and removed 2 candidate discrepancy forms. One listed my candidate number, my seat, and a claim that my identity barcode had been misapplied due to packet adhesion. The requested correction reassigned the written paper initially scanned under my file to candidate B12, Mira Sloan. The second form reassigned Myra's paper to me. Both forms were signed by Assistant Registrar Owen Sloan, Myra's cousin. Both had been submitted at 11:46 a.m., 43 minutes after Dr. Voss sealed my blank sheet separately and before normal scanning had begun. In the old life, those forms had operated invisibly. Here, stripped of successful outcome, they looked clumsy, greedy, almost stupid. Ms. Harrow turned to Mira. Did you request or authorize any discrepancy correction concerning candidate Vale's written paper? Myra's face emptied. No. Did you know your cousin filed these forms? No. Did you communicate with him during or after the exam? We're family. Maybe before. Not about this. The digital auditor lifted another page. Candidate Sloane's phone sent a message to Owen Sloane at 8:17 a.m. reading. Same plan. Red folder. 11:45 after collection. The room went completely still. Celeste recovered first. Teenagers use foolish language. It could refer to anything. Agreed, Ms. Harrow said. Which is why we did not rely on the message alone. She opened the evidence sleeve. Inside lay my answer sheet, still blank, Dr. Voss's initials at the top and bottom, the red seal unbroken. Beside it, she placed a scanned printout from Myra's candidate file. It showed the same blank sheet, not the physical paper, but the attempted digital reassignment record, attached for 32 seconds before the audit lock froze the transaction. The system had tried to make my nothing become her score. Nothing is light until a thief carries it. Then it becomes a stone. The attempted correction would have assigned candidate Vale's blank written sheet to candidate Sloane, Ms. Harrow said. A subsequent manual override was attempted to suppress the blank scan and restore candidate Sloane's original answer booklet before final scoring. That override failed because candidate Vale's paper was under evidence seal. Myra's breathing grew loud. Celeste said, "Failed internal handling by a registrar should not be attributed to my daughter." "We have not concluded attribution," Ms. Harrow replied. "We are establishing facts." Then she looked at me. "Candidate Vale, did you at any point give candidate Sloane permission to access, correct, represent, or alter your examination records?" "No. Did you agree to swap scores, packets, seats, candidate labels, or answer sheets?" "No. Did you communicate with candidate Sloane during the exam?"
No.
She dropped a pen and whispered my name. I did not respond. Dr. Voss nodded once. The proctor log confirmed it. Mira finally turned to me, and for the first time since rebirth, she looked genuinely young. Not innocent. Just young in the way selfish people do, when consequences arrive before they have prepared an older face. "Nora," she said, "tell them this is a misunderstanding." I remembered her corridor whisper in the old life. "You should have been grateful just being near me." I said, "It is not." The inquiry recessed for 20 minutes. They placed us in separate rooms. Mine had a plastic chair, a water cooler, and a window overlooking the loading dock where staff pushed sealed exam crates on metal trolleys. I watched one crate catch briefly on a crack in the pavement and thought about how systems always pretend to be smooth until weight reveals the gaps. My mother arrived halfway through the recess, breathless from taking 2 buses. She had a folder of my old certificates clutched against her chest, as if proof of who I was might be required at any moment. When she saw me, she asked only, "Are you still okay?" Not "Did you win?" Not "What will people say?" Not "Why did you do this to us?" "Are you still okay?" I nodded, and she sat beside me without touching the evidence documents, without demanding the story before I could bear to tell it. Across the hall, Celeste's voice rose once, then dropped. Mira cried loudly enough that the receptionist glanced up. I wondered whether the tears were strategy or fear. Perhaps both. People like Mira do not become false because they never feel. They become dangerous because their feelings are always treated as more important than other people's facts. At 10:40, Ms. Harrow called us back. This time, Owen Sloane was present on a video screen, pale and sweating in a room somewhere else in the building. He had already given a statement. That was clear from Myra's expression. Betrayal among thieves has a particular smell, metallic and panicked. The board played a clip from the records annex camera. It showed Owen removing a red folder from a locked drawer, placing 2 correction forms on top of a stack, checking his phone, and waiting until a female student in a white cardigan appeared at the doorway. The camera angle did not catch her face. It did catch her navy ribbon. It did catch the candidate bracelet on her wrist. B12. Mira said nothing. Celeste said, "That image is inconclusive." The digital auditor zoomed. Not on the face. On the bracelet. Every candidate bracelet carried a microprint session code visible under magnification. B12. Mira had walked into records during the restricted period. She had not merely benefited from a cousin's rogue action. She had entered the machine room herself. Ms. Harrow's voice remained even. Candidate Sloan, do you wish to revise your statement? Myra's mouth opened.
Closed.
Opened again. Nora told me to, she whispered. It was so predictable, I felt almost disappointed. Celeste stiffened. Mira. But Mira was drowning now, and drowning people grab knives by the blade. She told me she was blanking her paper, because she wanted me to win. She said afterward we could fix it. She said we deserved the award together, but my family had better connections, so I should be the face, and she would work behind me. She planned this, and now she's acting like a victim. In my first life, that lie might have worked. It sounded ugly but emotionally legible. Poor girl envies rich friend, schemes, regrets, accuses. Institutions love motives they recognize. This time, Ms. Harrow turned to the communications log. Provide any message, witness, or recording supporting that claim. Myra's eyes darted. She said it in person. When? Before the exam. Where? Her room. Anyone present? No. Then how do you explain candidate Vale's email to Integrity before arrival, which described a suspected unauthorized correction without naming you and committed to a blank submission as a control measure? Mira looked at me as if I had cheated by learning the rules. In a way, I had. I had learned them by being crushed beneath them once. The board did not announce a decision that day. Boards rarely move with the speed victims deserve. They suspended Myra's results pending disciplinary review, suspended Owen from records, and placed my written score under protected anomaly status instead of 0. That phrase made my aunt furious because she could not brag about it or condemn it without explanation. When we returned home, she followed me into the kitchen and hissed, "Do you realize what you've done? The Sloans are powerful. If this becomes public, people will say you staged it for attention." My mother turned so sharply the kettle rattled on the stove. Enough.
My aunt blinked.
My mother rarely raised her voice. Poverty had trained her to be polite to people who had space to make her uncomfortable. But that day she stood between us and said, "My daughter protected herself. If that embarrasses people who hurt her, let them be embarrassed." I had survived rebirth, an exam hall, Myra's mother, and a board inquiry without crying, but that nearly broke me. In the old life, my mother's belief had been buried under manipulated records. Now it surfaced early, small but breathing. I went to my room, locked the door, and finally opened the candidate portal. My written score showed not applicable evidence control. My oral score showed 94. Preliminary rank, pending. Myra's profile showed withheld. In the academy chat, rumors evolved into hysteria. Some students defended Mira automatically. Some said no one that perfect could cheat. Others said they had always wondered how her essays sounded like mine. That last message was deleted within minutes, but I screenshotted it anyway. Reputations are not destroyed by one revelation. They rot from all the little truths people were waiting for permission to say. The next week became a war fought in whispers, emails, and carefully worded announcements. Celeste Sloan hired lawyers who requested that the board dismiss all evidence collected after my provocative blank submission as entrapment. The word made me laugh for the first time in days. Entrapment, as if I had forced Mira to file false forms by refusing to provide a better paper to steal. The board denied the request, not because they loved me, but because the integrity vulnerability was bigger than one candidate. If they framed my trap as misconduct, they would have to admit their own system could be manipulated by a registrar with a red folder and a family loyalty problem. Instead, they expanded the audit. That was when the story grew teeth. For past correction forms filed by Owen Sloan surfaced, all benefiting candidates connected to wealthy families, all involving students whose appeals had been denied as unsupported. One girl had lost a science placement. One boy had been ranked below a minister's nephew. Another candidate had withdrawn after being told his handwriting did not match his scan. My first life had not been an isolated tragedy. It had been part of a small industry of polish theft. That knowledge did not comfort me. It made the old wound larger. But it also meant the board could no longer bury the case quietly. Too many ghosts had names. Dr. Voss called me on Thursday evening and said, "Miss Vale, the board may ask you to sit a secured replacement written paper." Because mine was blank? Because your blank submission was classified as a control under an accepted integrity concern. You knowingly sacrificed the original written component to preserve evidence. There is precedent for administrative remedy. Will people say I got special treatment? People say many things when procedure catches them. I smiled into the phone. When? Saturday morning. Separate location. Recorded custody. External examiners. A second chance, clean and witnessed, arrived not as a miracle, but as paperwork. I had never loved paperwork more. Mira came to see me the night before the replacement exam. Not with her mother this time. Alone. She waited outside our building under a streetlight, hair loose, cardigan gone, face bare of the delicate makeup that made teachers call her angelic. For one foolish second, I remembered being 13 and sharing strawberry candies under the library stairs. I remembered how real friendship had felt before I learned it could be counterfeit. She stepped forward when I approached. "I need to talk." "No, you need me alone. Please." The words sounded torn out of her, and some old reflex in me almost answered. That is the worst part of betrayal. The body remembers love after the mind has accepted evidence. I kept 3 steps between us and held my phone openly, recording. "Talk." She saw the phone and laughed without humor. "You really hate me now. I understand you now. That's worse." Rain began to mist between us. She wrapped her arms around herself. "You don't know what it was like," she said. "Everyone expected me to be extraordinary. My mother, the academy, sponsors, reporters. You could be brilliant quietly. I had to be brilliant publicly."
I sætte her.
"So you stole from me because attention was heavy?" Her face twisted. "You make it sound simple. It is simple."
No.
"You don't understand. You were always there, always better, always acting like you didn't care about applause. Do you know how humiliating that is? To stand beside someone who doesn't even want the thing you need and watch them get it naturally." I thought about my mother counting coins for medication, about library shifts, about hunger disguised as discipline. I wanted it. Not like me. There it was again. Her need, larger than my right. She moved closer. "Withdraw the complaint. Sit the replacement. Win whatever consolation prize they give you. I'll leave. My mother can arrange for me to study abroad under another name. You'll never see me again." "And the others?" "What others?" "The candidates your cousin helped erase." Her eyes went flat. "Don't become dramatic." The recorder captured that. I put the phone away. "Good luck, Mira." "Nora." I walked past her. Behind me, she said, "You think a blank sheet makes you pure? You still destroyed me." I turned at the door.
No.
"I handed you nothing. You chose what to do with it." The secured replacement exam took place in a municipal archive reading room that smelled of dust, leather, and old storms trapped in paper. There were no classmates, no cameras, no Mira watching my pen. Just 2 external examiners, a government observer, Dr. Voss, and one desk beneath a green-shaded lamp. My new answer booklet arrived sealed in a gray evidence envelope. They filmed the opening. They filmed my ID check. They filmed the clock. It should have felt humiliating, but instead it felt like breathing after years underwater. The questions were different, harder in some ways, cleaner in others. The main essay asked whether legitimacy can survive when institutions prioritize reputation over remedy. I nearly laughed. Then I wrote. Not frantically. Not to prove I was not broken. I wrote the way I had always wanted to write before fear and hunger learned to sit beside me. I wrote about systems that confuse silence with consent, about audit trails as moral architecture, about the difference between trust and unexamined convenience. I cited cases, histories, ethics frameworks, and one public inquiry where a clerk's small alteration had changed hundreds of lives. I did not mention Mira. I did not need to. She had already made herself an example. When time ended, my hand cramped so badly I could barely release the pen. Dr. Voss sealed the booklet herself. "Whatever happens, she said quietly as the camera was turned off. You should know you did something useful. Useful. Not gifted, not tragic, not difficult. Useful. In that moment, it was the highest praise I could imagine. Outside, the sky had cleared, and my mother waited on the steps with a paper bag of warm buns because she said victories should be fed even before they are announced. The disciplinary hearing was public only to affected parties, which meant half the academy spent the morning pretending not to wait outside the board building. Mira entered with Celeste and 2 lawyers. I entered with my mother and a student advocate assigned by the board after the case expanded. My aunt tried to come, then decided at the last minute that she had a migraine, which meant she suspected the outcome might not flatter her either way. The hearing chamber had wooden walls, a long raised bench, and microphones that made every breath feel official. The board chair was not the same man from my first life appeal. That man had retired 2 years later under a cloud, though not soon enough to save me then. This chair, Madame Illaricale, had a face like carved stone and a reputation for hating embarrassment more than conflict. She opened with a summary, so dry it was devastating. Candidate Mira Sloan stood accused of unauthorized access to restricted examination records, conspiracy to falsify candidate identity corrections, attempted reassignment of written examination materials, false statements during inquiry, and conduct prejudicial to the integrity of the laureate examination. Assistant Registrar Owen Sloan had already admitted filing the forms at Myra's request, though he claimed he believed both candidates had consented. The claim was unsupported. Myra's lawyers argued pressure, ambiguity, family misunderstanding, youthful panic, and procedural overreach. They used many words to avoid saying theft. Then the board played my recording from outside the apartment building. Myra's voice filled the chamber. You could be brilliant quietly. I had to be brilliant publicly. Then, what others? Then, don't become dramatic. Celeste closed her eyes. Mira stared at the table. Her lawyer requested the recording be contextualized. Madame Kale said, It has been. When they called me to speak, I expected rage to rise. It did not. Rage had carried me through the exam hall, the audit, the evidence, and Myra's pleas, but by the time I sat before the microphone, I felt something colder and more precise. In another version of this case, I said, and almost smiled at the private truth hidden inside those words, I would have written my best paper. Candidate Sloan would have attempted to take it. If she succeeded, I would have been forced to prove that excellence had once belonged to me. That is almost impossible after records are altered, because victims of clean paperwork look irrational. So, I did not give the system a brilliant paper to misplace. I gave it a blank one, witnessed, sealed, and documented. I did not trap candidate Sloan by deceiving her. I removed the things she intended to steal. Everything that followed required choices by other people. I looked at Mira then. She was crying, but quietly now, not for the room. For years, I thought kindness meant making myself easy to use. I shared notes, strategies, time, answers, sympathy. When someone takes from you gently, you can spend years calling it friendship because the alternative makes you feel stupid. I am not here to ask the board to punish ambition. I am here to ask it to stop rewarding theft when theft arrives well-dressed. The room stayed silent after I finished. Not the awkward silence of disbelief. The heavier one that comes when people understand they're being watched by their own consciences. My mother squeezed my hand under the table. Madame Kale thanked me without softening her face. That was fine. I did not need softness from institutions. I needed records. The decision took 90 minutes. During the break, Mira approached me in the corridor despite her lawyer's panic. Are you happy? She asked. The question sounded childish enough to hurt.
No, liar.
Happiness is not what this is. Then what do you want? I looked through the tall window at the courtyard below, where candidates from younger years had gathered to stare up at the hearing floor. In the old life, I would have wanted my score back, my reputation, my mother's peace, my years. In this life, those desires were still there, but they had changed shape. I want you unable to do this again. Mira flinched as if I had named a violence. You think I'm a monster? No, I said. That would make it too easy. Monsters are rare. You're worse because everyone knows someone like you. Someone who smiles while taking credit. Someone who calls boundaries betrayal. Someone who thinks needing something badly enough turns theft into survival. People forgive that every day because it looks normal.
Her tears spilled then.
I was your friend. You were near me. She shook her head. You loved me. The cruelty of it was that she was right. Some version of me had. The girl who shared candies with her, who fixed her essay outlines, who defended her when teachers called her scattered, who felt proud when Mira improved because she thought improvement meant they were growing together. That love had been real. Myra's use of it did not make my feeling false. It only made her theft deeper. Yes, I said. And you spent it. The hearing officer called us back before she could answer. Madam Kale read the findings without drama. Mira Sloane's examination result was voided in full. She was disqualified from the current laureate cycle. She was barred for 5 years from any examination administered by the National Laureate Board and permanently barred from holding candidate representative, scholarship ambassador, or peer mentoring status in affiliated programs. Her conduct would be referred to the Solène Civil Academy and to any institutions to which she had submitted laureate credentials. Owen Sloane was terminated and referred for administrative misconduct. All candidate correction processes from the previous 4 years would undergo independent review. Affected candidates would be notified. Then came my part. My blank written paper would not be scored as a failure because it had been submitted under an accepted integrity control protocol before administration. My secured replacement paper would stand as my written component. My preliminary total would be released after moderation. Until then, my candidate status remained active. Not vindicated in fireworks. Not crowned in a single thunderclap. Active. After dying once under a false record, active felt like resurrection spelled in bureaucratic ink. Mira made a sound beside me, a broken inhale, and Celeste stood as if she could object through posture alone. Her lawyers whispered. Madam Kale closed the folder. This matter is adjourned. Just like that, the room exhaled history. Reporters were waiting outside by then, because rich families can suppress many things except the scent of public downfall. The board released a statement before anyone could spin the story. Attempted candidate score manipulation detected through pre-filed integrity control. Offending candidate voided. Independent audit expanded. My name was not in the statement. Myra's was not either. But everyone at Ashford knew. The results came 3 days later at 7 p.m. I did not open them immediately. That surprised everyone except my mother. My aunt hovered with her phone ready, already half rehearsing whichever reaction would best suit her social circle. My mother put soup on the table and said, "Eat first."
So we ate.
Lentil soup, too much pepper, bread toasted nearly black because I had forgotten it under the grill. The portal waited in my pocket like a second heartbeat. After dinner, I opened it at the kitchen table where, in another life, my mother had asked me to swear I was innocent. Candidate 3-1874, written component 96, oral component 94, composite 95.2, national rank 3, scholarship status awarded. Interview track, Solène Civil Academy, public law and institutional oversight. For a moment, the numbers did not become meaning. They were just shapes on a screen. Then my mother covered her mouth, and my aunt screamed as if she personally had sat the replacement exam. I laughed. Not elegantly. Not like a heroine in the final chapter. I laughed so hard I cried, and my mother cried too, and even my aunt cried in a way that might have been real or might have been relief that the family had become impressive again. It did not matter. Outside our apartment, someone set off illegal fireworks for an unrelated festival, and colored light flashed against the kitchen window. In the old life, Mira had stood beneath fireworks at the Laureate Gala while I watched from a dark apartment, erased. This time, no gala could have matched burnt toast, peppered soup, my mother's arms around me, and a score that belonged to the person whose name was printed beside it. The laureate ceremony happened in the same hall where, in my first life, Mira had once stood under gold lights and thanked me as the friend who kept me grounded, turning even my erasure into a charming anecdote. This time, I almost refused to attend. The scholarship letter had already arrived. The rank was already official. I did not need applause from an institution that had nearly become another mouth repeating Myra's version of events. But my mother bought a dark green dress from a clearance rack and spent 2 nights altering the hem by hand, pretending she was only doing it because the fabric would go to waste otherwise. When I tried it on, she looked at me in the mirror and said, "You don't have to forgive the room to walk into it." That was the sentence that sent me back. The ceremony hall was full of velvet seats, brass railings, white flowers, and the dense, uncomfortable silence of people trying to celebrate an exam cycle that had turned into a scandal. Some parents stared. Some looked away. A few teachers smiled too brightly, as if enthusiasm could cover the fact that they had spent years calling Mira disciplined while calling me intense. I walked down the center aisle with my mother beside me, and every step felt like reclaiming a floorboard from a house that had once thrown me out. When the board announced the top 50 candidates, they did not dramatize my case. They did not call me brave. They did not mention the blank sheet. They simply read my name, my rank, and my scholarship track. The applause came late, then grew, not thunderous, not cinematic, but real enough that my mother's shoulders shook. I stood, bowed once, and sat down before anyone could turn me into a symbol more comfortable than the truth. After the ceremony, 3 classmates approached me near the refreshment table. In the old life, they had avoided my messages after the score scandal, not because they hated me, but because association with a suspected liar felt inconvenient. I had hated them for that, then hated myself for needing them. Now they stood with paper cups of sparkling juice, faces pink with shame. "Nora," said Elise Park, who used to borrow my history outlines through Mira, "we wanted to say we're sorry." The other 2 nodded quickly. Sorry is a small word with a strange ego. People often expect it to unlock doors they have not repaired. I waited. Elise swallowed. I believed Mira when she said you were unstable. Not because it made sense, because it was easier. She was popular and teachers liked her, and I didn't want to be on the wrong side of something messy. That honesty mattered more than a polished apology would have. Another girl, Hannah, added, "I also noticed your essay structures in her mock answers before. I told myself you studied together. I should have asked you." The third said nothing but looked miserable enough to fade into the wallpaper. I could have absolved them. The old Nora would have, desperate to smooth the air. Instead, I said, "Thank you for telling me. Don't do that to the next person." Elise nodded, tears gathering. "We won't." Maybe they meant it. Maybe they would still choose comfort next time. I had learned not to build my safety on other people's promises. But as they left, one younger student who had been hovering nearby stepped closer and whispered, "I changed my password after what happened to you." I laughed, startled.
Good.
Then another said, "I started keeping drafts with timestamps." By the time we left, I realized justice had spread in a way scandal never could have if I had only won privately. My blank sheet had become a rumor, yes, but also a habit forming inside other girls who had been taught to share too much with people who smiled too easily. The hardest part came later that night, after my mother fell asleep on the sofa, with the ceremony program still open on her lap. I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened an old storage box from under my bed. Inside were years of Mira, birthday cards, matching keychains, a photo booth strip from our 15th birthday where she kissed my cheek and I grinned like someone chosen, notes folded into tiny squares, a cheap bracelet she gave me after I helped her pass winter mathematics. In the first life, I had destroyed these things after the hearing, not dramatically, just one by one, because every object felt like proof that I had been foolish. This time, I did not burn them. I spread them across the table and let the grief be complicated. The girl in those photos had loved a friend. She had not deserved to be punished for believing in sweetness. Myra's betrayal did not mean my loyalty had been stupid, only unprotected. That distinction took longer to learn than any exam framework. I placed the photo booth strip back into the box, not as a treasure, not as forgiveness, but as evidence of another kind, evidence that I had once been open, and that being hurt had not made that openness shameful. Then I added a copy of the board's final decision, the ceremony program, and a printout of my replacement score. The box was no longer a shrine to someone who used me. It became an archive of the person I had survived being. I closed the lid and wrote one sentence on the label. Do not destroy the record just because it hurts. Mira disappeared from school before graduation. Officially, she transferred for health reasons. Unofficially, her family tried to send her abroad, but the board referral followed faster than their money. Schools that might have welcomed a fallen golden girl became cautious once the word falsification entered her file. Celeste sold their house 6 months later and moved to the coast. Owen's case uncovered enough irregularities that 2 former candidates had placements restored. One received compensation, and several administrators resigned while insisting they had done nothing wrong except trust the wrong subordinate. Dr. Voss was appointed to redesign examination custody procedures, and the red folder system was replaced by a digital dual authorization process that required external approval and automatic candidate notification. Ashford held an assembly about integrity, where the headmaster spoke very solemnly, without mentioning that the academy had spent years praising Myra's collaborative excellence, while ignoring the quieter student whose work she mirrored. I sat in the back row and listened without bitterness surprising me. Not because I had become saintly, because I had learned that public lessons are often built from private ruins, and if mine had to become architecture, at least no one would again be crushed under that exact wall unnoticed. After the assembly, younger students approached me with awkward admiration. One asked whether I had really handed in a blank sheet without shaking. I shook later. I told her. Bravery is mostly scheduling your collapse for after the evidence is safe. She wrote that down as if it were official advice. Maybe it was. Years later, at the Solène Civil Academy, I specialized in institutional oversight, which made some people laugh because they said I had chosen a field out of spite. They were not entirely wrong. Spite, properly disciplined, is just memory with a work ethic. I studied audit systems, administrative law, whistleblower protections, evidence custody, and the quiet ways injustice survives by looking too boring to investigate. My classmates loved dramatic cases. Ministers caught on recordings, judges exposed, corporations collapsing under leaked files. I preferred the small mechanisms. A form filed too late. A signature without countersignature. A correction log no one reads because the person harmed has no power to insist. That is where lives disappear. Not always in explosions. Sometimes in tidy rows of numbers that look official because the paper is clean. On the anniversary of the exam, Dr. Voss sent me a photograph of the new candidate submission protocol. Every answer sheet, including blanks, received a time-stamped image, candidate confirmation, and automatic archive hold. At the bottom of the sample form, someone had typed, "Intentional blank submission must be preserved as material record." I stared at that sentence for a long time. My blank sheet had become policy. A page with no answers had taught the system a question. I saw Mira only once after that, 5 years later, in the lobby of a government building where I had been invited to speak on examination integrity. She stood near the security desk wearing a visitor badge, older but not smaller, her hair cut to her chin, her face stripped of the golden softness people once projected onto her. For a moment, we simply looked at each other across the polished floor.
No cameras. No mothers.
No board members. No red folder. She approached first. Lenora. My full name sounded strange in her voice. Mira. She glanced at the conference sign behind me. Institutional trust after administrative failure. That's very you. It became me. Her mouth tightened. I heard you did well. I heard you changed your surname. My mother remarried. I see. The conversation could have ended there, safely meaningless. Instead, she said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just taken the exam normally?" I thought of the old life, like a room still locked somewhere inside me. My mother's doubt, Myra's televised smile, the appeal denial, rain against a cheap office window, my name turned into a cautionary tale. "No," I said. "I know what would have happened." She studied me then, perhaps hearing the weight behind the answer, perhaps not. "I was terrible to you," she said. The apology was too small for what it tried to carry, but at least it did not come dressed as an excuse. Yes. I used to think you ruined my life. And now. She looked toward the security gate, where people emptied pockets into trays and waited to be cleared by machines that cared nothing for charm. Now I think I built mine out of borrowed things, and you were the first person who made me give one back. I did not forgive her. Forgiveness, I had learned, is not a debt victims owe to prove recovery. But I nodded, because truth deserves acknowledgement even when it arrives late. Goodbye, Mira. Goodbye, Nora. She left through the revolving doors, and this time, I did not watch until she disappeared. When I tell a story now, people always focus on the blank sheet. They call it clever, cold, ruthless, symbolic. They ask whether I was afraid to throw away the exam I had studied for all my life. The answer is yes. Of course I was afraid. I was terrified from the moment I opened my eyes at that vanity with half-curled hair and heard Mira humming outside my door. I was terrified in the car, in Hall A, while questions I knew how to answer sat untouched beneath my hands. I was terrified when Dr. Voss sealed the blank page, when Myra's mother placed flowers on our table like a threat, when the board played evidence that could still have been twisted if one important person preferred comfort over truth. Courage did not feel like fire. It felt like nausea, paperwork, silence, and choosing not to save people from the consequences they had arranged for themselves. The blank sheet worked because it was empty, yes, but also because for once I refused to fill emptiness with explanations before anyone earned them. Mira had built her life by assuming I would always provide the content. The notes, the answers, the emotional labor, the brilliance, the forgiveness, the story she could stand inside and call her own. On that day, I gave her nothing.
She took it anyway.
That was how the board knew. That was how I knew. A thief can deny stealing treasure. It is harder to explain why your hands are wrapped around an empty box only the victim told the guards to watch. So if there's a lesson, it is not that blank sheets are magic or that revenge heals everything or that systems become fair because one girl outsmarts one liar. Systems do not become fair by accident. They become fairer when someone makes unfairness expensive to ignore. I lost one life learning that brilliance without protection can be harvested by anyone bold enough to smile while holding a knife. I used the next life to protect the evidence before protecting my pride. And in the end, the bestie who swapped our scores was voided, not because I shouted louder, cried prettier, or begged the right adults to believe me, but because I finally understood the language they trusted.
Seals. Logs.
Timestamps. Witnesses. Contradictions. A blank page preserved before a lie could write over it. My name is Lenora Vale. Candidate 31874. I once handed in nothing on purpose. Nothing became the heaviest proof in the room. And when Mira Sloan reached for my future, all she caught was the emptiness I had left for her, clean, witnessed, and impossible to return.